to join us. Great. So how about Sabrina, you get us started?
Yeah, so thank you so much to all of you for tuning in today, and welcome to today's talk on running and winning down ballot races, a workshop with Run for Something, co-hosted by the Institute of Politics Campaign and Advocacy Program and the Ashe Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. We're so excited to be working together on this. So just a little bit about the Campaigns and Advocacy Program. We're one of the IOP's student programs at Harvard College. And CAP is a workshop style program intended to help develop students' electoral and advocacy skills. This semester, we've been focusing a lot on electoral work, looking at 2020, and with recent changes, we've obviously shifted gears, but we've also been able to open up our meetings to the wider IOP community. So we've been really thrilled to be able to do that. Just a couple housekeeping announcements to get us started. First, I just wanted to thank everyone in advance for your patience with any technological glitches we may encounter today. And to minimize interruptions, the audience is muted during the presentation, but we encourage you to use the chat box for questions or comments, because we definitely want to hear from you. We want this conversation to be super interactive, so following the presentation, we'll have plenty of time for you to ask questions directly, and we'll be asking you to just use the raise your hand feature, and we can unmute you. So I'm thrilled to be introducing Teresa today. Teresa is the Associate Director of the Ashe Center's Democratic Governance Program at the Harvard Kennedy School, where she bridges practice, technology, and academia to reimagine our democracy. For over 10 years, Teresa has worked at the state and national levels in a variety of policy, political, and governance roles, including running legislative departments in the California legislature and Congress, and she helps consult for various electoral campaigns. And Teresa will be serving as our moderator today. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Sabrina. Hi, everyone. Teresa again from the Ashe Center. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, the Ashe Center is one of 12 research think tanks at the Harvard Kennedy School. And among the many things we do, we focus on bridging academia and practice to improve our democracy. We are thinking a lot about the ways everyday citizens can be conduits to change in their communities. While there is a tendency to think of federal political office as a starting point for one's political career, we often overlook the tremendous power of local government positions and down ballot races have in effectuating change. And it is a little less intimidating place to start your journey in elected service. I'm grateful to introduce our speakers today who created a movement in getting everyday citizens who are fed up with the status quo to run for something. Hopefully by the end of today, you will be inspired to run for positions at the city, county, state level, or perhaps for a special district. And of course, we'll learn that there's many, many other places you can serve. Joining us tonight is Ross Morales-Rocketto, co-founder and chief program and recruitment officer at Run for Something. Ross is a progressive political operative with 15 years of experience in campaign management, grassroots organizing, and data analytics. Say hi. Also joining us is Manny Espitia. He's the Northern Regional Director at Run for Something. He caught the political bug after working on President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign and has worked on campaigns across the country. He is based in Nashua, New Hampshire, and ran for office himself and is now a state representative. So it'll be great to get into that insight as well. Welcome, gentlemen. You can take it away.
Hey, y'all.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it, and honored to be in such awesome company. Manny and I will go through like a little PowerPoint presentation that we have for 10 to 15 minutes. And then, we really want to make sure that like the rest of this is open to questions. I'm also going to apologize in advance My cat's no longer behind me, I don't think. But I have 2 cats and a dog. I'm also living in a house with 3 people, so you'll probably hear them. You can probably hear my wife in the background right now. I work in the living room, which is right next to the kitchen, so it's strategically placed for people to always be walking through all day, even when I'm on calls all day. So yeah, thank you again for being here. Really excited to jump in. Manny, if you want to pull up the presentation, you can just go ahead and get started.
I'm doing that right now. So this first slide takes forever to load.
Also, just like, and Manny, you should give a little bit like more background on yourself if you want. Like, I think for me, I come to this work by way of, just like, honestly, like, I think a great way of describing me is like a political hack. I've been doing this work for a long time. I caught the bug in 2002 when I was working for a Senate race in Texas for a Democratic candidate. That person, of course, didn't win because it's Texas. So, I went from there. I worked in 2004 during the primaries in Oklahoma. This is not something that other college students should do. This is before people like decide realize they could take time off or a semester off. I just stopped going to class to organize. So I basically moved up to Oklahoma for a few months and worked on a presidential campaign up there in 2004. And then 2008, I also worked the presidential cycle in Iowa. And then I bounced around the country for a long time. And then ended up back in DC around 2012. I ended up in a place where, I had a great time during the 2016 election until election night. And then, it sort of like turned my own world upside down. I had thought a long time ago about sort of like the structure of an organization that would sort of eventually run for something. And around the same time, my wife, Jess, connected me with my co-founder, Amanda, who was also thinking of something similar. And we started writing some plans and talking. And we just said like YOLO and then like announced an organization on inauguration day in 2017. We thought if we were really lucky, we would get maybe 100 candidates to sign up in the first week. In the first day, we had about 1,000. In the first few months, we ended up with 10,000. And as of today, we have 50,000 folks who have told us that they're interested in running for office. So we looked at each other in that moment back in 2017 and said, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse, but holy shit, we need to do right by all of these people who said that they wanted to run for office. And so we started building an organization from there. And so, from there, Run for Something sort of like grew out of like that moment. We recruit and support young, diverse, progressive folks who are running for state and local office for the first or second time. Meaning that we don't do anything federal, we don't do Congress, Senate, any of that. And we really want to be working with folks who like are just getting their careers off the ground, because we know that those are the folks who really need our help the most. I'll stop talking for a second and let Manny introduce himself a little bit more if he wants to, and then I'll just like jump right in.
Sure. So thanks, Ross. So yeah, my name is Manny Espitia. I originally started back in 2012. I graduated from college, and then a year out, my best friend asked me if I wanted to work on the Obama campaign in New Mexico. And I was like, was young, and I was like, yo, this sounds amazing. Why not? So I packed up all my stuff, an unpaid internship, by the way, packed up all my stuff like in my car and drove to New Mexico like a week later to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and became a fellow out there. And then after about a month and a half of organizing in Las Vegas, New Mexico, which is absolutely nothing like Las Vegas, Nevada, I ended up becoming an organizer in Albuquerque. And I spent the rest of the summer and fall working out there for President Obama's reelection campaign. It was the best experiences of my life, and decided after that that I wanted to keep working in campaigns. So I've bounced around from place to place, from LA, from Chicago to Texas, and eventually landed in Nashua, New Hampshire, where I worked for Hillary Clinton's primary election in 2015. Um, I loved it. I think New Hampshire is an interesting place where people are incredibly politically active. And so I decided after the primary that I wanted to stay there and kind of like build some roots there. So I worked for the mayor's office, which taught me a lot about local politics, a lot about local, like what municipal government does and how it works. I was in the constituent services office, which is probably the best office to ever be in, where we hear everything from people, from there's a pothole in my neighborhood to there's my neighbor has a tree that's in my yard that's encroaching on my fence, and I'm like, and in my head I'm like, why don't you just talk to your neighbor? But things like that. So it made me, but it like, and like, we had budget decisions on your local, on like what schools looked like. So it really made me appreciate local politics. I ended up working for Senator Maggie Hassan after that, in 2017. And then in 2019, I worked for, 2018, I decided to run for office, and because why not? It always starts with somebody asking you. That's how I got introduced to it. Somebody told me, they were like, you should do it. You'd be great. And um, somebody who I trusted, and I decided to do it. So, and I knocked on a bunch of doors, I made a bunch of phone calls, raised some money, and got elected. And then in 2019, I worked for Secretary Julian Castro's primary campaign. And then in 2020, after it's all over, Ross and I talked over an interview, and he invited me and allowed me to run for something, which has been an amazing experience. Had a chance to work with a lot of local and state candidates who up in the Northeast and in the Mid-Atlantic, who are, working hard to try to, improve our country which is in a terrible situation right now. So I work with endorsed candidates, and I work to, help their campaign, whether it's giving them advice on mail, giving them advice on like what let their get out the vote operations look like now, or if they want to just vent to somebody, I'm their guy. So I'm really excited about my new role, and I'm excited to tell you guys a little bit about running for office. So Ross, go ahead.
Yeah, so the first thing that we try to talk about with candidates, and that like anytime like I have a conversation with someone who's thinking about running for office, is like basically always starting with their why. It's truthfully the most important like part of like running for office. Everything comes out of it, whether it's whether it's like how you run your field program, like how you like structure your messaging, your policy, like literally everything flows out of your why. And I can't tell you how many candidates I talk to, including folks that I've worked with at the presidential level, who when you ask them why they're running, don't have like a great answer. You can look at a number of the presidential campaigns this election cycle, and you could probably tell which ones. I'm not going to name names, but you could probably tell the ones that didn't have a strong theory of their why. And it's not just because, like it's important for the candidate and the campaign to know. It's because it's the essential question that voters are really asking you. Like voters will ask you a million different types of questions, but the thing that they really want to know at their core is like who you are as a person. Like, why should they trust you? Like, and being able to explain to them succinctly and in a coherent way why you are running for office is like the first step to building that trust with them. A thing that I also tell a lot of like candidates and campaigns, and like also like, I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't say this out loud, is that like policy doesn't really matter when you're running for office.
It's true.
It does
but
it does in the way that like what people are using policy to see in you is like, what are your values? They're using the policies that they see on your website, the things that you talk about at town halls, like the way that you interact with them, like if you're knocking on their door, like they're looking at the things that you're telling them, and they're basically saying like, does this person share my values? And two, do the values that this person say they have line up with what I see right in front of me? And, like despite a lot of sort of like people feeling to the contrary, like voters are pretty good at like sifting through bullshit. If you're not clear on why you're running for office, if you're not clear on what your values are, if you're not clear on what you really want to do, like the problems that you want to solve in your community, like they'll be able to tell, after even like a 2-3 minute conversation with you. It just becomes really clear. And that's why everything starts with, why are you running? It's the thing that your entire campaign team needs to be on the same page about. Everyone needs to know it. Everyone needs to be able to recite it. And it also goes back to this thing that like, it's the thing that you're going to continue to repeat the most over the course of your entire campaign. You're sometimes going to do it in different words and you're going to say it in different ways, but like you're always going to come back to it. And the thing that I tell a lot of candidates is like, if you haven't said it so many times that it makes you want to throw up every time it comes out, every time you say it, you haven't said it enough yet. Like it is like the main thing that you should always be talking about. Every single issue, every single question should always be brought back to that central question of like why it is that you're running for office. So that's sort of like the very first place that I think it's really important for people to start. The next place like is, like what am I going to run for? And I think that this is also a really important question that aligns with your why. So like, I actually think for most people, they really need to think about their why before they think about what I'm going to run for. And like, the question shouldn't be like, what am I running to be? It's what problems am I running to solve? And like, all of that comes from your why. So like, if you're really interested in like making education in your community better, you might want to look at school board. If you are really interested in like, making sure like the roads are paved and like garbage gets picked up on time, like you might want to run for city council. If you live in like a county where there just aren't a lot of cities and you like want to make sure that like people are able to get access to city services, you might want to run for a county office. I think one of the most common conversations I had, especially in 2017 with people, was telling them that they should not run for Congress. Like one of the best way, I think, and it makes sense, like people really wanted to fight back against Donald Trump. And for every Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that like runs and wins in one of these races, there are like thousands of candidates who tried to do the same thing and were not successful the way that she was. She is like a special person. She's like special. She is gifted. She's one of the most gifted politicians I've ever seen. Like just like naturally, she's an incredible communicator. And like, she also like had the right stew of things happening in her district, like at the time that she decided to run. And so most people are not going to be that. But what you can be is like your next like state senator, or you can be like you're the next state legislature from your community, especially like in a place like New Hampshire, and Manny can talk about this, or if you have like 300 voters like in a district, and like you literally will like know everyone. It might be more than 300 voters, but not by a lot.
3,000.
So like, I think that it's really important to like look at your sort of like what is available in your community, who's already serving, are they doing a good job, and then making sure all of that comes back to like, why am I actually running for office? From there, from this point, I'm actually going to now kick it to Manny. He's way better at training than I am. and he's gonna like take this home and be A+ at it. So go ahead, Manny.
Well, if you want a really good tool, we've created runforwhat.net. I believe, is it runforwhat.net or runforwhat.com? Runforwhat.net. So you should check that out. It will literally give you a breakdown of every office you can run for. And it's super handy. So, and it actually tells you what you need to get into those offices. So like if you need 1,000 petitions or things like that. So, or if you need a certain amount of like $1,000 to file for the filing, like, and it also tells you like what the positions do. So super handy tool, highly recommend it. So yeah, going off of that, I think when you're looking at, running for that office, you got to look at, you do your research, you got to look at who is holding that office right now. Like for example, are they, and like my state senator, Cindy Rosenwald, how long has she held that office? She's held it for this is her first term. So she's held it for 2 years. And then you got to figure out, what that win number is. So what is a win number? Like you got to look at how many votes it takes to win, basically. Like you look at what turnout is, you look at and what you expect turnout to be. You kind of do an average of like, if it's 2018, then it's probably going to look a lot like what 2014 looked like, which is a midterm election. Or if it's a municipal election, it's probably going to look at what the last municipal election is. So you take that number and then you figure out what you think the number of votes it is to win, and then you add a 1, and then that's how many votes you're going to need. So looking at the win number, you also want to look at like how much money that the previous incumbent raised. So I know Cindy raised like $80,000. So I should figure out that, okay, I'm going to need about $80,000 to compete for this seat. And then, you start making all those calculations. And before you even decide to like, I'm going to go file my name to be on the ballot, you want to ask your family, you want to ask your friends, and run it through them first, because they will let you know whether or not you're making a smart decision. I ran it through my at the time girlfriend, now fiance, and she was like, okay, that's fine, that just doesn't mean that means we're not gonna move anytime soon. And I was like, okay. So and yeah, it worked out. So my parents laughed at me a little bit, but they were like, do what you want to do, like you be you. So um next, you want to think about how you're going to get on the ballot. So you figured out what you want to do. So you want to check in with your local city or town clerk, or your Secretary of State office on what the requirements are to get in that office. I think most of the time most offices will have pretty, like, especially for local and city level, they're not that hard. Like one of my friends, she ran for city council, and she needed about 100 petitions. So I went out with her, knocked on some doors, and got her, like I was her witness. So whenever she'd get a signature, she'd get the person to sign, and we'd get her on the ballot. Here in New Hampshire, if you want to run for state representative, it requires $2. Pretty straightforward. Massachusetts, it's about 150 signatures. So right now, actually, a lot of the Massachusetts people are collecting their petitions. They're figuring it out. Yeah, there is a deadline to this. So in New Hampshire, it's June 13th is the final day to file your petitions, or to pay your $2. And if you don't do that, you don't get on the ballot. So like you can have these visions of grandeur, but if you don't get on the ballot, then it doesn't matter. Like most people who run like write-in ballots, it's really, like write-in campaigns, it's really difficult to get on it to like win those. So I know of a few people who won write-in like campaigns, but it's like they're special candidates still. So following that, like, now you figured out, like, all right, I now know, like, I got my $2. I have I've consulted, I'm gonna do this. Now you want to assemble your team. So you want to get the first thing you need is a treasurer most of the time. So in places, most states require a treasurer. So you want to go ahead and get like somebody you trust, and somebody you trust with numbers, and somebody who's got time. Like if you send them like, okay, here's my finance report. Can you just look through this and make sure everything's good, and like make sure that expenses matches your receipts and stuff like that. Like you want to make sure you have a really good person to be a treasurer. And then that person will probably be in your kitchen cabinet. So building a kitchen cabinet is like, you know, your friends who friends who support you and know a little bit about and are willing to give you time, and then people you know who are very well seasoned and kind of have an idea of what they're doing for the campaign. So they may know, like, you know, they might have worked on campaigns before. So on my friend who was running for city council, I was on her kitchen cabinet, and so I have a little bit of campaign experience. So I was helping her kind of figure out, like, okay, this is what you should do for fundraising, this is what you should do for your digital stuff. So but they don't have to be like, you know, well, like experienced politicos. They can be just people who you trust, who will help you get the job done. And then following that, you want to create a campaign plan with this team. You want to sit down with them and say, okay, I need to create a budget. I need to figure out, like, you know, if this is gonna be a close election, I'm gonna need, you know, like I need mailers, I need some literature, I'm gonna need some maybe yard signs, things like that, and start creating a budget and then also, so from your budget, and then creating your message saying, all right, I'm going to run on these values. I'm going to run on transparency. I'm going to run on making sure that, like, you know, that we lower property taxes, things like that. I'm going to run on expanding Medicaid. And then, so like, and I'm going to run on these because we got to take care of working class families. We need to make sure that we're standing up for those who, like, you know, for all Granite Staters, things like that. But like really kind of creating that message and like those values that's going to resonate with folks in your district. So so you create this plan, and you know, you want to create your message. So like Ross had said earlier, you want to be able to give an elevator pitch on why you're running. It should be quick and concise, and it should be something that's authentic to you and that connects to your personal story. So like for me, one of the reasons I ran is I live in a predominantly Latino community. I live in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the state. But to me, these people deserve the same opportunities that everyone else does, that they deserve to have like the properly education levels same as those in wealthy communities. And you know, I think that everyone deserves a chance to have to go to higher education. So universities and colleges should have tuition that reflects that. So like that's why I like ran, and that's, you know, those were some of the issues. That's the message I talked about. So and yeah, so this, you should connect the issues to the community, and like basically you should be able to talk about those issues, and you should be able to practice this because especially when you're door knocking all the time, or making phone calls all the time and talking to people who are going to support your campaign, they want to hear why you're running, and you should be able to say it over and over and over again. And as somebody who like basically was working for a presidential candidate, like I heard Julian Castro's speech a million times, and like I at one point was able to say it word for word. And like that's how good you should be at your messages. It should be like you should have it ingrained in your brain, and all your friends should basically know it. Like your friends should have like the greatest hits kind of to it. So and then one of the tools you're going to use during this while you're running is, you know, using the hard ask. It's a really important skill that is that's important not just in politics, but I think in life. It's because when you're running for office, you're going to need some help. So you should be, you know, prepared to ask people for things like, you know, their vote. You're going to ask people for their time, and you're going to be asking people for their money. Like so when you're asking for their vote, like you can't just be wishy-washy. It's like, oh, I hope you vote for me, or like maybe vote for me. It's got to be like, hey, I need your vote, can I count on your vote in November? It's got to be very specific, it's got to be like very active, and it can't be a kind of yes or no in that sense. It's like, can I count, like it's got to be a very like, can I count, are you going to be voting in person or by mail? Like asking questions where people are going to say like, you can kind of get people away from saying no. But when, a lot of the time people are gonna say no. So when you ask your friends, hey, are you free on Saturday? Can you come out and knock on doors for my campaign? Some of your friends are gonna be like, oh no, man, I can't make it. I have a barbecue that day, or I don't have any money at this time. So you got to get comfortable with people saying no, and you got to kind of like push through it, because that's gonna be it's gonna be something, especially now where it's a little bit harder to campaign. Like, a lot of people are gonna say no to you, and but at the same time, you got to be thankful for the people who say yes. So I always say, like, always be thankful for your friends who are volunteering for you, or they don't have to even be friends, but the people who volunteer for you, the people who donate to you, because those people are your most valuable resource. Those are the people who are going to make your campaign, or the people who are out making phone calls for you, are the people who are going to donate $20 to your campaign, who are going to help you design your mail piece, whatever it is. Like, be thankful for those people. And then here's just a few list of a few things that I think are really important. So nuts and bolts, like you want to get an EIN number with the IRS, which create a campaign bank account. You want to find a site to use to raise money. Things like ActBlue, which is kind of a trusted source. Like, some people use PayPal. That's not really advised. I think a lot of people know ActBlue for Democratic campaigns, so you want to use that. You want to look at what campaign finance disclosure forms and calendars are. So if you want to, like, when I ran, I know that I have to file every 6 months. So I know that my next filing is in May, for example. So I have to do a filing in May. Because if you don't do that, people are going to raise their eyebrows and they're going to ask questions, and it's not a good indicator. And you might even get some penalties, like they might fine you. So make sure you know when to file. And then always, before you even launch, you should have a website, you should have a campaign email, you should have a social media account. I've had friends one of my friends was running a campaign for governor, and he did not have a verified account, and therefore he could not do digital ads, which was a big deal, because if you want to raise money, like, you want to have a verified account so that you can actually do Facebook ads, and in those, they require a level of identity verification. So these are all things that are like very nuts and bolts, but if you don't do them, it's going to be very bad, because it can, like, it's just, these are just things you'll trip over in. And then also, when you're thinking about fundraising, campaigns they require some money, and you need some money to be able to succeed. That doesn't mean you should be self-funding. We always say at Run for Something that almost very, very few of our candidates are millionaires. I don't know how many, I don't know which ones are, but like very, very few of them are. Most of them are like working class people. Some of them were college students. So like, a lot of them didn't have the resources to self-fund, so to speak. So, but money should not be a barrier. Money is something that, like, we figure out, and we figure out what our budget is. We've looked at how much it's going to cost. So we're like, all right, we set a goal. This is how much we're going to raise. So you practice the hard ask, and and when you're calling people, like, basically you're introducing yourself, you're telling them why you should run, and then finally you should tell them, basically you should give them a hard ask and tell them, Ross, I need $100. Can I count it to make sure I have money for my for clipboards and for my mail? Can I count on you to give me $100? And Ross can say, hoping yes.
Nah, it's cool.
No, okay, thanks, Ross. Well, I know you can't do 100. Can you do 50?
I could do 25.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. So, I got $25 from Ross, and that's something. So, and you should always push through a little bit. You can be a little pushy, and it's okay to be pushy. Also, like, I'm going to say this later, but given always look at context, look at what's going on in today's world. Like, unemployment's going to be it's currently at 15%. It's going to get worse. Be cognizant of that, be respectful. Like, it's okay. Like, people are still fundraising, but we got to be okay with, like, Like if you know somebody who's working in the service industry no longer has a job, probably not a good idea to call them. And if so, just be like, always be aware of what's going on, because, and that goes even beyond what's going on right now, just being aware of people's situations. One of my best friends, I asked him for money when I first ran, and he couldn't give me any money because his dog got hit by a car and needed surgery, and the dog is okay now, thank God. But like at that time, he couldn't give, and that's okay. So and when we're practicing this, when we're doing this, we're doing call time, and call time should be a block of time that's like 7 to 9 or 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. That time is like sacred. That time is where you're just sitting down and you're just picking up the phone, you're making phone calls, and that's all you're doing. That's all you should be focusing on. And it's something that I always think is really important, because people always say like, oh, or candidates will always say, oh, I'm going to do call time this time, and then they're like, oh, I'd rather do something else, or wait, I have to review this thing over here, and they will figure out ways to not do call time, and that's not okay, because in order for campaigns to run, you need some money. So that should be a sacred time where you're sitting down just making those phone calls, because it's really easy to make yourself not want to do call time. And then online fundraising, so sending out emails, which I'm sure a lot of you, if you subscribe to certain candidates, get. That's basically what's in right now. And it's a big source of a lot of campaigns, especially larger campaigns like presidential campaigns and statewide campaigns. They use a lot of online fundraising. And at the same time, we see that online fundraising can make a big difference in people's campaigns when you get $5-10, because that goes a long way to making sure you hit your goal. So I always think of them as buckets. So like, you do call time, you do online fundraising, and then every little bit goes into that until you hit your budget number. And then finally, you always want to follow up with a thank you. I have a personal friend of mine who is a very like a high level person in New Hampshire politics, and he says that he will no longer donate to a campaign because they never sent him a thank you once. And like, this person is now a really important like politician, like elected official, and he basically said, I'm never donating to the campaign again because never sent me a thank you. He ran for state rep, he ran for like all these other positions, never sent me a thank you. So yeah, I'll vote for him all the time. So like, always follow up with a thank you, not because of that, but because you really should appreciate these people helping you out. So that's on fundraising. And then when you're talking to voters, you're like, in order to win, you're gonna need to talk to voters. You're gonna have to do, especially when you're running on the local and state level, you're gonna have to make a bunch of phone calls. Usually, you gotta knock on doors. Obviously, we can't do that right now, but like phone calls are right now what what we're gonna do to earn people's votes. So this means that you're going to have your message that you like have tailored, and you've got it down to a T. You're going to be able to have to give that message. People, when they ask you questions like, are you going to address the issue with bobcats in my neighborhood, like, you're going to have to either say like, I will get back to you, like, I don't have that answer. If you have that answer, great. But you're going to be like, people are going to ask you questions all the time. So you got to be comfortable that people are going to ask you a lot of questions. And most people right off, like, they might just say, oh, you're a Democrat, yes. Oh, or there might be a Republican, they're like, oh, you're a Democrat, no. So like, just getting used to the fact that like some people might say yes, some other people might say no, and just keep pushing on. And then you always want to listen. I think one of the mistakes that we make, some candidates make, is that sometimes we'll like give our whole spiel, and then we won't listen to the person about what their issues are. So you want to talk to them, and you want to say like, what are some issues that you like, what are, like, how do you see our community, how do you see our neighborhood, like, what do you like about our neighborhood, things like that. I mean, I remember I had like a 90-year-old tell me, they're like, well, there's too many guns in our streets. And I was a World War II veteran, and I think I could be wrong, I think he was like World War II, or it might be a Korean. one war. But he told me, he's like, I was a veteran, and I know that the only reason like guns were made is to kill things, and like whether that's hunting or whatever, so they shouldn't be on our streets. And I was like, damn, I was not expecting that answer. So like, you want to hear people's stories, you want to hear what people care about. So it's sometimes we get caught up in like, we get really nervous and we'll just talk. And so it's important to kind of like just talk, like shut up and listen, because like that's really how you're gonna might be able to earn somebody's vote. Next. And then there are people and organizations that are out here to help. This is not a solo mission. This is not, you won't be in a silo. Like there are people out there that will help you. Whether that's groups like Emily's List, that they help pro-choice women candidates. They tend to help more state and like federal races, but they do have done a lot more state stuff, which is really nice to see. And there's Latino Victory that helps Latino candidates. There's Run for Something. We are here to help y'all. And then there's also people like unions, who are more than happy to help out if you support their causes. There's activists who will stand up for you and support your cause if you align with them. The people who are going to help you out the most are going to be your friends. They're like your family. I mean, those are the people that are really going to go out and knock on doors for you because they care about you and they love you and they want to see you succeed. So I mean, in the end of the day, it's like, you don't have to do this alone. You just have to ask, and you have to be willing to get people's help. So I think with that, yeah, I think that's everything. So that is here to answer any questions or answer anything. So that is my presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I think Sabrina's going to lead us on some questions that we might have from the audience.
Yeah, so just to sort of kick things off a little bit, specifically for like young people or college students or people fresh out of college, what is like a good place for those kind of people to start going directly into the campaign world?
I'd say that I think it depends on what folks are interested in. I think there's a couple of ways. The first is you can just jump onto a campaign, although, like I think, in the time of coronavirus, everything is a little bit different. Like around this time, in the calendar, like theoretically, you'd expect for presidential campaigns to be hiring, so there to be a lot of jobs, but that's not currently happening right now. And we'll see I don't think anyone really knows what's going to happen, but typically at this point in the calendar, there'd be hiring happening on presidential, like whoever the nominee is for a presidential campaign. There's going to be congressional campaigns, Senate campaigns, statewide campaigns, state and local campaigns happening all over the country, thousands and thousands of them. Like those are always really amazing to hop onto, and oftentimes are easier to get on. And will lead to sort of like more rich experiences sometimes than like a presidential campaign will. In 2005, I walked into a campaign office and said like, hey, I would love to be an intern. Like I saw that you were hiring interns on your website, so I decided to come by and like apply, which is like kind of quaint now. Like I have like a paper copy of my resume, and I was dressed all nice and some khakis and a button up, and I walked in and they were like, oh, like, yeah, we like need you. So we like really need you. And, like I sort of rolled my sleeves up and worked hard, did what they asked me to do. And by the end of the campaign, I was the deputy field director, and I was like running all of our get out the vote efforts on election day. And that was for Julian Castro's first campaign for mayor. So like in San Antonio. So like you can, like at the state and local level, you can do a lot of really interesting things, in large part because like there's just fewer people who want to do it. But like I think that the work is extremely rewarding. The people you meet are awesome, and it's like a really good way to sort of like meet like people who will sort of like be lifelong friends. I think the other part of it, that I'll say is like there's another route, which is like going into a community and just sort of like getting yourself rooted there. So meaning like, you know, like you just become a part of the community, like if you want to be in a specific place. And, you know, I get asked, I'm sure someone will ask this question, I get asked it a lot, like, what do you, like, how long do I have to live in a place before I run for office? There's like no set like time frame for that. The thing that I try to tell people is like, when you've lived in a community, when it's 10 o'clock at night and there's a problem in the community and somebody from the area is calling you to try to help solve that problem, like that's how you know, like whether you've done the work. And so I would say like a big part of like thinking about this, like as folks are thinking about running for office, is like making sure you're putting in the work in the community. It will make your life so much easier and better, like when you actually run, and it will like increases chances that you win, and like increase the amount of goodwill that's out there for you. So Manny, I'm sure you've got stuff too.
I mean, that last part is so true. I think when I was running, people knew me as the guy who worked for the mayor. So like it was pretty straightforward, like as to who I was. And I'd only lived in New Hampshire for 3 years. So when I ran, so like it's not a lot of time, like, but I think you're right on that. I think I mean, obviously there are some places that's like, you know, if I wanted to run for state senate, I can't run until I've been here for 7 years. But like, so there are some places that will have rules, but like end of the day, like, knowing that you're a valued member of the community is like, and that you know people and that you're really well connected is important. I will also say, like, don't, like, I know the guy who sits next to me in the state house is a Dartmouth student. And he was one of the youngest like state legislators. He was really connected to the college, did a lot of work on the college, and awesome guy. And like he ran for office and he won. So like I think don't be afraid. Just, it's as long as you're being honest and like you're being authentic and you actually legitimately care about your community, like those should not preclude you. And I think he had been active since he was a kid, so like in campaigns, so like he knew what he was doing. So like also be like always volunteer for folks. Like volunteering for people is like a really good way of figuring out whether or not you want to do this, because like you're going to be like, the volunteer work you do is basically going to be amplified when you run for office. So always feel free to help people, because candidates love the help. So
Thank you so much for that. And just a reminder for everyone watching on YouTube, feel free to send us in your questions as well. But going into the chat, as a reminder, just raise your hands too. But looking at the chat, Amna was wondering, she's from the UK, and she's interested in helping others run for office. She was wondering if you have a view on how much of your model can be translated, but how much is also US specific.
We've had this conversation with folks in like different countries. I think the context is different everywhere. The way that political parties are structured is different everywhere. Sort of like the amount of room that you have to sort of like iterate and all of that kind of stuff is just like going to be different in every country. So like, I think the sort of like charge of getting more young, diverse, progressive people running for office is something that can translate to other places. The sort of specifics on how, like, I think are going to probably have to be different in every country.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. That was me that asked the question, so I appreciate that. Have you, just as a follow-up then, have you had any conversations with people in the UK? The reason I ask is because I've run for office in the UK, and when I was back, before I came to the Kennedy School, I had looked at run for something as a really interesting model. So it had already come across the Atlantic. I don't know if that's interesting to know, but also I'd be interested to know if you've had any conversations with anyone in the UK.
We have had a few conversations with folks in the UK, and we have like a sort of small group of committed folks who are like supporters of us. So we were supposed to go out there and visit, unfortunately, before coronavirus. Now, you know, we probably might not go till next year, but yeah, we do have folks in the UK. And I think my email, like like everyone can have my email. It's ross@runforsomething.net. So if you ever want to like talk about anything, like feel free to just reach out.
Thank you.
Awesome. Joshua, do you need to ask your question, or I can ask it on your behalf? All right. So with whom do you stress test your messaging before rolling it out?
So like when I mentioned your friends and family, they will be honest with you and they will tell you whether it's good or not. Like they hello child, but like they will tell you what's real, because I think most of the, unless they're the ones who crafted it, and in which case you want to go to other friends, and then kind of test it with them. And I mean, once you get to larger races, like if you're running a competitive Senate race, for example, in New York, like you might get some polling people. Like it just depends on like the amount of resources you have, but don't like I always say, like try it out on the doors and see what happens. If it's not resonating, then like you will tell whether or not it's resonating or not. Like start it's like, start figuring it out, tweaking it, seeing how it can be better updated. So
Awesome. Jen Williams was asking, since knocking on doors is out right now, what are some strategies you think we should be employing to get our messages out during this time?
So phone calling is in. I think it's funny too because phone calling, like in probably 2008 and 2012, phone calling was a big thing. Like it was still good, and then in 2016, phone call like it just crashed. Like contact rates were like at 9%. It was terrible. Like so like 1 out of 10 people like phone calls you made resulted in an actual conversation. Now a lot of our candidates are saying that they're getting a lot of connections, that a lot of people are picking up their phone, so that should be one of the first places you look, is making phone calls. The other is texting, so it's around the same lines. Texting is really handy, especially if you're looking at things like, for example, vote by mail and getting people resources. So like um texting is not as personal, like in a sense, as having a real life phone conversation, but like if you want to send somebody like, here are the COVID-19 resources in your community, easy text, and I'm sure they will literally appreciate it. Here's how you get your ballot for the New York election, like easy text. And there are definitely vendors who like will send you bulk text messages. So that's like one other technique. I think the other two are social media. And it's a little bit trickier to kind of get through social media and like figuring out ways to actually connect with voters on that. And then number three is like simple, like, pen and paper, like either if you want to do postcarding, that's still, I think that's probably gonna be effective. And I don't know if direct mail is super effective, but I would say postcards are good.
Thank you. Joshua was wondering, what are some suggestions for mid-career folks looking to transition back into politics?
So find what you're interested in. I think if you're good at something, do it. Like if you figure that, like did Ross drop? Let me see. Oh, Ross is there. But I think like if you are really passionate about like the school board, run for school board. Like I just think it depends on what you really want to do and what you have the time for. So like I think a lot of it is just kind of figure out, like for people who are like, because I know a lot of people who like, especially when they retire, literally what they do is run for office right afterwards. So like figure out what you actually, if you're in a career change, like whether like if that's a position that pays. So like in New York and Pennsylvania, like those positions, like if you're running for state rep, those are real positions, like those pay real money. In New Hampshire, pay $200, so like that doesn't count. It's like a volunteer position here, so like make sure it's like, it's a real thing. Like and like also like that whole check out your community, make sure you're somebody like if like that you've connected to your community, and then also just be willing, like when you run for the first time, it's not going to be easy, and you might not win, but you just gotta get through it. So I think does that answer the question?
Teresa, do you want to check in with our folks on YouTube?
Yeah. Let's see. We have a question from Raymond. Should a business or government professional consider running for office? What things should they consider when making their decision? And I'll just add, a lot of questions that I get is, are there professional tracks or people who are currently working in fields that lend themselves to be more likely to be elected or more marketable as a candidate? What are your thoughts around that?
So I always say, like, you don't have to come from a certain field to get elected. I mean, shoot, Scott Walker didn't graduate from college. That man got elected governor. So like you don't like it doesn't like your educational background isn't a predeterminant of whether or not you're electable. I think like one of the things, I think there are certain skills that are incredibly important that are super useful. Like if you work in communications or if you work in like journalism, like you're probably gonna be able to write a better op-ed than I ever will be. So like those are like really useful skills. I think being personable and like using those, like I think those are some of like just being able to be like person to person and be able to communicate your message. Those are some of the most useful skills. I think like also like if you come from the business world or you come from that kind of background where you have management experience, people look at that and they value experience too. I think it just depends on how the way you want to message yourself out there. And then one of the other things is like there are groups out there like Emerge, for example, that will help you, like literally train you so that you will run for office one day. Like Emerge's whole point is to train women to run for office, Democratic women to run for office. So like they're great. Like you're a Democratic woman and you're interested in running, you should check them out because they will. And they teach women from all different backgrounds, so they're an amazing group. So so the answer to the question, yes, it's useful, and definitely highlight it, but it's not a precursor to whether or not you should run.
Great. I have one more question from someone on YouTube. This is from Halem. In Indonesia, candidates aren't allowed to fundraise during a campaign and people don't donate. What should a young local candidate do in this situation? So this is another international question, but perhaps maybe you've had conversations with other people in similar situations in the past.
Yeah, I've done a number of international campaigns over the course of my career. I think so. It's not a super surprising like scenario. I think it opens you up to like spend your time and energy like to talk to voters. You know, right now I think Manny was talking about like a lot of that is like on the phone and online. And every country has sort of like a different context for like how you can reach out to voters and what that looks like. So you should make sure to follow like the local, state, local, federal regulations in your country. But I would spend like, that means to me, like, that's amazing. Like that means you spend a majority of your time talking to voters. Like talking to as many people as you can, telling them your story, why you're running for office, what your values are, what you want to do when you get elected. I think like that's honestly like that's the ideal best case scenario, is that like you're running in a place where, you know, like you can spend all of your time like really interacting with like other human beings.
As a big fan of publicly funded elections, I also agree. Like if you could tell me that we can get rid of call time, we'd be all good, I would be in heaven. I would much rather be talking to people, figuring out how we can actually, you know, how we can connect everyone and how we can actually get our message out, because that's to me more important than just raising money, but in my mind. But the same time, you got to be able to pay for mail. So.
Awesome. And feel free to keep raising your hands or dropping questions in the chat box. Oh, we have a question from Chun Ying. What kind of strategies are you using to ensure the coming November voting?
I mean, vote by mail is going to be a big thing. Whether or not there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. We've seen elections already in Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin, about 70% of voters voted absentee. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have a Pennsylvania election coming up on June 2nd. I wouldn't be surprised if it's over 80 to 90%, or if they just turn that into an all-mail election, which personally would be the best. But most people are going to vote by mail, and I think there is a process to vote by mail. Like, you can't just, like, you have to request a ballot. There's like a lot of there are barriers to it. So I think what a big strategy is going to be is like just kind of hyping up that message, like, all right, have you gotten your ballot yet? Have you requested a ballot yet? Things like that. And have you returned your ballot have you postmarked your ballot? Things like that. So I think that's going to be a huge push. And I just think campaigning is going to be, I think we kind of have to stop thinking about this massive rally that's going to happen, because I don't know if we're going to see any of those this year. But like, I think it's gonna be a lot of like just virtual stuff, and I think we're gonna have to meet voters where they are, and that's right now. It's in the virtual world and through Zoom conferencing and through Google Hangouts, and I think I think that's okay. So it just has to be, you got to meet, and that's the rule with all elections. You got to meet voters where they are. So this is no different. So I just think it's just adapting and switching everything to voting by mail. Ross, do you have anything, Ross?
Yeah, it's gonna be a mess. Like, every state's gonna have different vote by mail regulations. So like, you'll just need to make sure to know what the people need, candidates, campaigns, etc. are gonna have to make sure that people in each state understand what the regulations are. They are actually changing on a daily basis at this point. So like, like some states are moving just like to all registered voter. They're going to send like the ballots to all registered voters. Some states are still requiring people to request them. Some states have like same-day voter registration, and states still don't know how they're going to do same-day voter registration over vote by mail. So like, there's just a lot. I think that's still yet left to be figured out. The thing I will say is that like, fundamentals of elections don't ever really change, which is that like, they're about building relationships with people. Presidential campaigns are just doing it at a much larger scale than like state and local campaigns, but fundamentally they're about the same thing. And so I think like to a large degree, like the best thing we can do to motivate voters is to make sure we have really good state and local candidates running like at every part of the ballot, and make sure that they're out there like having conversations with voters in whatever like ways they're able to right now. And inspiring more people to go out and vote. I think that's what's going to be needed. I don't think that changes as a result of coronavirus. I think it's the same thing. I think the logistics part probably is going to be different, but I think the fundamentals are the
same. Jason Wells was wondering, are there any actionable examples for what putting in the work into a specific community is? So going back to your presentation.
So I always think like, volunteering and other things, not just in campaigns. I mean, obviously if you're whether Democrat, Republican, like get involved with a group. Like, it's always nice to know who the members are with a local group. I think the other thing though is like, like volunteering involved, like food shelter or food banks, for example, or shelters or whatever it is. Like, getting involved in a nonpartisan way is also a really good way to like to be involved in the community and to kind of do that. Like, I know one person, for example, who ran in a more conservative area, and she won. She was the school guidance counselor for like 20 years. So literally, like, people were like, I don't care if you're a Democrat, I'm voting for you. Like, so there are like, and so like there are ways to like that will bypass the partisan like line. It's like people really care about who's already working in the community, who is making a difference regardless of party. Like I think, and like those are some of my favorite candidates, are the people that like that everyone knows because of something they've done in the community. So those are some of my favorite people.
Awesome. So we'll wrap up questions here and I'll pass it back over to Teresa.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks again, Ross and Manny and Sabrina, for managing our questions today. This talk will be posted on the Ashe Center website for later viewing, and we'll make sure to get a copy over to our partners at IOP, who can post it on their website in case you want to revisit some of the points that our presenters made today. If you like what you saw, I recommend that you follow Run for Something and check the Ashe Center and IOP event calendars for similar conversations. And you can follow our respective work at Harvard Ashe and at Harvard IOP on Twitter. And lastly, I want to thank the audience for joining us and the great questions that you asked. And hopefully you are going to leave inspired. I think that there's a great need for your leadership at this moment. And so with that, goodbye, everyone. Thanks so much and take care.